So, Danilo, hi, welcome to the Global Living Room. And we are really looking forward to talk to someone directly from United States on today's key topic. And let's talk about Trump.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to see you guys.
So, Danilo, my personal understanding of Donald Trump is not that he is disease. Though I know really many people who see him as a kind of virus, disease, problem. For me, he is a symptom, basically, of a disease of a system, social system in the United States. And as a symptom, he was mostly welcomed to reveal the disease itself. However, as any symptom, if it gets too strong, then it can damage the organism itself. So basically, I see Donald Trump as a high body temperature that was good to reveal that the system is ill. However, if he gets a second mandate, my personal belief is that the temperature would be too high that it can even damage the patient. So what do you think of Donald Trump? What would you say?
I like this metaphor a lot, by the way. You know, I come from sociology, and there's a long tradition, Durkheimian tradition, really. Emil Durkheim was very fond of this metaphor of the social organism. And then this whole idea of social pathologies and what's a social pathology and what's not, and then how is it going to destroy the social organism the way that a cancer would destroy a human, and what should we amputate? Which organ exactly is the one to be amputated? No, I think you just articulated one of a kind of common understanding that is. I think at the beginning of the victory, unexpected victory in 2016, I think it took a number of months for the kind of chattering classes to figure out what exactly went wrong, to reinterpret some of their understandings, and to look at the statistical models and why was Nate Silver wrong and all of this. And I think in that early period, the emphasis was really on his personality, his mental health, what kind of narcissism is it, what kind of megalomania are we dealing with, and the rest of it. And I think gradually after that they transitioned to an understanding that this is more of a symptom and a signal of deeper social processes, deeper sociological processes, and that he's, no matter how eccentric, that he is part of a what is in fact a tradition, and that there are precedents within the Republican Party for people who are so far off the spectrum of what East Coast elites understand as some kind of normal understanding on things like climate change, on things like labor, on things like what kind of welfare state is acceptable for the United States, on a whole slew of issues. You had a tradition of candidates like Rick Santorum, if you remember, or Sarah Palin is another example. In every election cycle, there are figures like that who are mobilizing a Republican constituency, which is not necessarily represented properly in the Republican establishment, in the party machinery, in the donor class, in the fundraisers, the funding class of the Republican Party, but is a reality in the Republican base. And the only difference is that those figures didn't necessarily make it, and this guy did. So in terms of the party politics, he certainly didn't come out of the blue, and it's not falling out of the sky, and he didn't emerge in a vacuum, but is representing a real constituency. It was visible in the Tea Party to a significant extent. It was energized and re-energized during the Obama administration. The Tea Party has been one of the most spectacular social movements in the United States for a great number of years. Unlike movements like Occupy Wall Street, it transferred its mobilization into congressional benefits, it transformed the face of the Congress. It moved it dramatically to the right, dramatically to the what used to be moderate republicanism is now considered some left-wing socialist agenda, and what used to be considered extreme, loony republicanism is now considered centrism within the Republican Party, significantly because of the Tea Party mobilization efforts. I mean, in terms of the pathology, you asked me, look, I think people differ on what exactly the disease or the pathology that he is a symptom of is. I think depending on, people can agree that he's a symptom, but have very divergent views about what exactly he is a symptom of. And I think a more sympathetic interpretation is that something went wrong with a more sympathetic from the perspective of kind of a benign view of the American democratic electoral process. The view is that a lot of people have been neglected by West Coast, East Coast elites, and that these people have been told for decades that, things like globalization of migration, globalization of trade, outsourcing of production is not a big deal and will not affect them, and will be, first they were told, sure, your firm is outsourcing a lot of jobs to China, but ultimately this will be good for you because in some grand scheme of competitive, some competitive advantage scheme at the global level, this will improve your position in the long term. And then when that didn't happen, they were told, don't worry that the immigrants are being allowed to take jobs that you have traditionally held, because this too is going to work itself out. And after a series of those things, there is a tremendous amount of anger and cultural anxiety, as it's called, sometimes also interpreted as outright racism towards xenophobia towards immigrants, racism towards various ethnic groups, right? And then these people do feel a kind of neglect, voicelessness, combined with this xenophobic, prejudicial attitudes, which are visible in the public opinion, right? And so the thought was, if the Democratic establishment had done a better job, if the Democratic Party, if various centrist Republican alternatives had done a better job of reaching out to those people, then Trump would never have emerged as a symptom. That's one interpretation. That actually, in the longer term, it's not a bad thing that he emerged, because it drew attention to all these populations that have been completely neglected. If you think about the electoral map, and then you have California and New York and a couple of other states on the East Coast. Donald Trump won. If you exclude those, right? If you exclude California, New York, and a couple of the East Coast blue states, in 2016, Donald Trump won over Hillary Clinton by 3 million votes. To include the whole picture, then Hillary Clinton won by 5 million votes. By 3 million votes. Or I forget. Sorry. If you look just at California, New York, and the East Coast, that's what it is. Hillary Clinton won by something like 5 million votes. Right? But if you look at the internal side, excluding those states, he won by 3 million. And so that shows you the kind of geographic divide, as well as the socioeconomic divide, because obviously much of the activity is on the coasts.
If we would go to the essence of the story, we could say that the left liberal elites betrayed common people, and that common people fought back basically by electing Donald Trump. For me, I got personal sense that these left liberal elites were pretty much lost into these various identity policies where this was the key moment for them. Adoption, kids adoption by gay couples, so very specific things like black women rights. All of these issues are relevant, but then they got out of sight the big picture of equality, of social matters. They got basically, they didn't care about majority of people, and then it fought back. Could you agree with this? Would this be too simplified? Would this be, it comes to my mind, for example, this Borat movie, if you remember, when he gets into this truck with
I see there's a new one.
Yeah, there is a new one, but the first part, when he gets into truck with American teenagers, and they are explaining him their philosophy. It's a weirdo bunch of ideas, and then they say on one place that the country is run by minorities, and if you are a minority, you can get everything more or less. And this is really interesting to hear that from the young people, and not from some disappointed. And for me, it was always interesting why these people are attacked. How do they get affiliation of so many people? What do they offer? He has to offer something that is not, he has to respond to some social demand.
I think, I haven't seen that particular step, but I know that general claim, and you hear it a lot from the Republican Party itself. It's a major mobilizing kind of a propaganda line about how something called identity politics, which isn't the way sociologists like to talk about it. So I know what you're referring to, this general kind of morass of concerns. I think, honestly, 90% of how it's talked about in public analyses is dead wrong. I mean, this particular statement about how if you're a minority, you can get your way more easily in the United States is, if you're talking about some particular tenure committee at Harvard, or if you're talking about some small work, some little pockets of exceptions in the kind of universities where I work, maybe conceivably that could be shown to be true. But in the country as a whole, I mean, that's not just is that wrong, it's the opposite of the truth. Look at let me give you one example. Prison system. Up until very recently, when China started imprisoning the Uyghurs in the millions, for decades, since the 70s, the United States was, depending on how you want to count the Uyghurs, right? But since the United States has had the biggest prison population of any country on earth, both in per capita terms and in absolute terms, you got these 3 million people, right? And over 2 million of them are ethnic minorities. If you look at residential segregation, the ethno-racial component is very, very striking. If you look at the justice system and you ask the question, how likely are you to get convicted for the same crime as a non-minority if you're a minority, you see a significant racial factor. If you look at, a whole slew of issues ranging from, so that's the bigger picture, right? I mean,
no, I would say that I suppose, that we all could agree that this is not a fact, and we're not really talking about facts that minorities are in better position. I wouldn't say that that there are any arguments to go in favor of this thesis. However, I'm only talking about narrative. So my question was how did we come to this narrative? That's my point. So the point is that I believe that social left liberal elites did betray common people, and somehow these common people were getting to the wrong narrative. And this is the question. Davor, I know
let me just say one thing. I know what you're referring to. I think I agree in principle, but we have to also remember that the people who are not the left liberal elites also do identity politics and have also been doing what we call identity politics. Is not just the particular salient thing you mentioned about like gay marriage or LGBT bathroom. Those are red herrings. If you look at the Obama tenures, and if you look at the right-wing mobilization, the xenophobic, I mentioned the Tea Party. You don't think they did identity politics? That was tremendous. Like, first of all, in sociology, we try not to talk about identity politics because all politics is identity politics. Like all politics has some kind of identity category and some kind of identification processes. The only question is, how is that identity formulated, constructed, and by whom, and how hybrid is it, and all the rest of it. And it's certainly true that a lot of economic class-based issues get misdiagnosed as racial issues, get misdiagnosed as abortion issues, get misdiagnosed as religious issues, probably, which Davor knows more about, right? But nevertheless, it is wrong to attribute the kind of creation of so-called identity politics to a bunch of left-wing intelligentsia. It's not the case. So a significant part of the antagonism to Obama was a kind of racial antagonism, Islamophobia antagonism, and that's been pretty well documented. That a lot of the resentment of Barack Hussein Obama. To this day, Trump holds rallies in which he emphasizes the sin of having a middle name called Hussein, and this mobilizes a lot of people, and that is indeed so we don't want to fall into this trap that, you know, until 2016 and Trump came along, elected by the Russians, and the liberal intelligentsia decides to do identity politics and therefore makes this mistake. The identity politics has been done, and much of it has been a kind of racist right-wing version, which we have to remember, because it's also very dangerous. The left-wing version, I think, is also dangerous. I agree with you.
Basically, when we talk about right-wing, we agree racism, but let's leave it for later. And the fact is only that out of the my personal perspective, that I would try to emphasize is that I have never expected anything from the people who are promoting racistic narratives. They never disappointed me, but the left liberals did disappoint me, because I was expecting something of them, and they basically covered the real truth with a fake story, unauthentic story, unauthentic narrative. Davor, why, Davor? Why would you prefer that Donald Trump wins on the upcoming elections? Why? How is it possible? Can you tell us how it is possible that, providing that the belief that you are insane and normal, educated intellectual, good educated intellectual, how can you prefer winning of Donald Trump on the coming elections?
I appreciate the joke, but let's get serious. There are some important points to say. As to normality, you know, there is psychoanalyst school that says that normality is only a special case of madness. So let's leave the question of normality and madness aside, and I would just like to begin with what you discussed at the beginning about the symptom and not the disease. And I think it's fairly common nowadays perception among people who know something more about the political system and political realities in the United States that of course Trump is not a disease per se, that he is a symptom of much more serious issues. But I would expand it a little bit more, and I would say that we have two symptoms nowadays. One is called Trump, and the other is called Biden. And you know, for the last elections, we had also two symptoms. One was still back then called Trump, and the other was called Hillary. And these symptoms actually are indicative of much bigger structural problems that society has inherited and accumulated for a very long period of time. And I would suggest to everyone, including all our viewers, to actually see and listen to a recent talk by Chris Hedges on the politics of cultural despair, which I think very in a very good way lays out those major issues and major challenges that are ahead of American society as a whole. And we can ask about what are the what's the sickness, what really is a problem if these are just manifestations, just symptoms that we see on the surface. And of course, it's also, we won't say anything new if we say that it's the process and expansion of neoliberal ideology. It is, I think, when it comes to the ideological level or ideological layer of the whole story, that it is basically deep rootedness in a certain version of right-wing ideology that both parties came to buy into. And if you listen to the major representatives and also major public intellectuals that support one or the other party, also superficially, it might seem that they advocate two very different versions of values and ideologies and all of that. But in actual reality, it's some of these differences are important. I wouldn't try to downplay the significance of that, like ecological issues primarily. But in general, they subscribe to a same kind of business-driven ideology. That's a combination of this right-wing ideological spectrum, by which I simply mean the idea that we live within this unified social whole that is somehow primordially balanced. And then if there is some kind of disturbance, if there is some kind of problem, there must be some intrusion from somewhere else, whether it's another ethnic group or racial group, or for that matter, someone who doesn't subscribe to our set of principle and ideologies. And of course, what's missed within this worldview is the possibility to see that societies in general, and in particular American society, is a society of deep class conflicts, inequalities that have exponentially grown. And then all of these ideological premises got intertwined with two other factors that I think are important. One is the tradition of exceptionalism that goes back to the very foundation of the country and has seen its many variations over these couple of hundreds of years. And another one is, of course, the development of consumerist mentality that goes hand in hand with this broader ideological narrative that I try to describe. So if we look at that, we see actually that problems that we could, of course, talk more in detail, and I'm sure Danilo would be able to give us a more detailed picture how economically is it affected in many different ways, and how all these class differences in a very real manner structure social reality, and yet become virtually invisible when you look at mainstream media. So that leads then to those seemingly paradoxes that are very often one and the same group of people could support Sanders and also could support Trump. So when you see it superficially, it seems incredible, but in actual reality, if we understand those deeper social processes, we see that going these different ways in what superficially seems as very different ideological and political poles could actually make sense.